large nerves, when you step off a curb and almost sprain your ankle, that happens in about 60 milliseconds. Well, it takes the large nerves that cross your ankle about 80 milliseconds to get that information to your brain. So they're about 20 milliseconds too late to tell you that you just sprained your ankle. So things happen fast, and one of the things we want from our feet is to get as much information as fast as possible to our brains and our spinal cord so we can make the best movement decisions. Well, your body's come up with a really cool sort of workaround for this. In your notes, it's called muscle tuning. Tuning theory or predictive coding is before your foot even hits the ground, your body makes really specific adjustments to your muscular system in order to deal appropriately with whatever surface you're on. So before your foot even hits the ground, your muscles are already contracting to get ready for what's going on. An example of this is a dance troupe, professional dancers practicing all the time, and they hardly have any injuries. They get a brand new dance studio with a brand new floor, and their injury rate goes way up. And they can't figure out why their injury rate is gone. They're still professional dancers, and they're doing what they do. And the floor, it's a hardwood floor, just like a sprung hardwood floor, just like they were on before. But with one difference. The new floor that they're on had some beams for extra support that crossed it. So at kind of regular intervals along this floor, you go from a really bouncy floor to a more solid floor. And the dancers, using muscle tuning or predictive coding, know what the floor feels like, but when they get to that one place where it's harder than their brain expects and land on that, they hadn't adjusted their muscles just right for that surface, and so their injury rates went up. They took the floor out, took those beams out, laid the floor back down, and their injury rate completely went away. And when you have a surface like this that looks completely the same, but something underneath it changes it, your brain, of course, unless you have X-ray vision, can't make those kinds of decisions. So predictive coding is a really cool thing that your body uses to sort of get around that feedback loop from actually having to touch something to making movement decisions. And so your body's constantly making movement decisions, and when you interact with the ground, another thing that you see in your notes is something called joint coupling, or kinetic chain theory. And what that says is that everything in your body is connected. And what happens at any one part of your body is going to have some influence on every other part of your body through the mechanical linkages of joints. So when your heel hits the ground, when you're walking, and your foot hits the ground, that's going to do something to everything on this side of your heel and everything on this side of your heel through each little joint. So for instance, when you're walking, your foot hits the ground. In your notes, do you have anything about pronation and supination yet? You have that? That's fantastic. Okay. Or let's see. No, we don't have that part yet. That's all right. So just really quickly, when your foot flexes towards the floor like that, this is called plantar flexion. And when your foot flexes like this is called dorsiflexion. And if your foot turns in like this, we call this adduction. And if it turns out like that, we call this abduction. And if your foot turns like this is called inversion and eversion. When you add some of these movements together, you get what's called pronation and supination. And Shoe stores like to sell shoes by telling you that you pronate too much or you supinate too much, and or that you're a pronator or a supinator. And it turns out they're sort of right. You are a pronator and a supinator, and it's important to do both things. The heel hits the ground, and you have all these bones right here, and when your heel hits the ground, you can see, if you look at the back of this foot, that your calcaneus, or your heel bone, it's not perfectly centered. It's kind of set off to the side. So when this heel hits the ground, the inside of your foot sort of starts to fall towards the ground. And what that does is it unlocks all of these bones in the foot and allows your foot to become a mobile adapter so that you can adapt to whatever surface you're on. And it also helps in force dissipation. It allows you to decelerate more effectively. On the other side of the ankle, or that heel, is your tibia, your shin bone. It rolls in as well, and that causes your femur to internally rotate internally rotate. And then as you start to push off, all of those things get reversed. And so every time you take a step, you go through that whole process. And it doesn't just stop at the hip. That joint coupling goes all the way up your spine. And all the little vertebrae do a little dance every time you take a step. It's just so small that ideally it's small so that you don't feel like when you're walking you're doing funny things like that. So that's the concept of joint coupling, and it's an important concept because it really demonstrates how whatever's going on at your foot is going to influence what happens throughout the rest of your body. And if you have faulty movement patterns, you can have issues in your knees, your hips, your back that all originate in your feet. A couple other arches in your foot as well. But that medial longitudinal arch is sort of the main suspension bridge in your foot that allows you to adapt to whatever surface you're on. And it's these bones through here that give it structure and support. One of the things about foot bones is this is the natural orientation of foot bones. So none of these bones in your foot are designed well for compression along the long axis. So that would be turning them up like this. Like your tibia here is designed to be loaded from top to bottom. These bones here never loaded from top to bottom. So what they are really are structural support for your arch. And it's through here I was talking about these bones can lock up or unlock to become a mobile adapter so that you can sort of deal with whatever surface you're on, and then a rigid lever to give you propulsion. Anytime you ask any of these bones to deal with compressive forces, you're going to get, especially if you do it long term, you're going to get inflammation and pain. So the arch is made up of these bones and then muscles and ligaments. And the ligament that I asked about, that's sort of the ligament that I asked about earlier is the plantar fascia. And that's a big sheet of connective tissue that starts right here on your heel and goes up to all of your toes. The thickest part of it goes from the heel up to the tip of the big toe, but you get some of it that goes to all of your toes. And your plantar fascia is an important structure for helping to propel you forward. And so that plantar fascia gets sort of wrapped around the toe and tightens everything up. And then as soon as your toe leaves the ground, that fascia kind of snaps. And so it actually helps to propel you forward. That's really cool. But the other thing that it does is when you're toeing off, I said about the joint coupling, your femur goes into external rotation, your tibia goes into external rotation, your foot, so all this goes into external rotation, all these bones lock up, and as you start to lift your heel, it tenses that plantar fascia and creates a more rigid foot so that you have a good lever that you can use to propel your body forward. If that doesn't all work out the way it should, then you have to use a lot more muscular effort to push off, and that's another way you create foot issues. So plantar fasciitis often is some sort of error in your ability to create a rigid lever to continue to push yourself, and so then you create some inflammation in these structures. And kind of two things about plantar fasciitis. Anytime you hear itis, you think inflammation of that plantar fascia. Well, a lot of new research saying that it might not be that after all. It might be something called plantar fasciosis, which is actually death of that tissue caused by cutting off blood circulation. And that's mostly due to something called toe spring in a shoe. So if you look at lots of athletic shoes, they have a lot of toe spring. It looks like the toes kind of curled up at the end. And so by putting your toes like that, that's sort of what you look like when you're toeing off, but that's just what's happening to your feet inside your shoe. And so it creates tension through there all the time. And that tension cuts off the blood supply to that fascia. That's one theory about plantar fasciitis and maybe fasciosis. And then the other is just that because your ability to make a rigid lever to push off is hampered for some reason, that it could just be a muscular issue. So there's a big giant muscle that goes to your big toe called the adductor hallucis, and right here. And if that muscle gets overused, just like if you came to the gym and you worked your biceps really hard, they'd be sore the next day. Well, imagine if you did that day after day after day after day with never taking a break. That would cause you lots of issues as well. So those are a couple of reasons why you might have plantar fasciitis. Foot strengthening exercises. So just like every other muscle, they need regular work to get stronger. And most of us don't do any kind of foot exercises. In fact, we do just the opposite of foot exercises. We put our feet in highly supportive, restrictive shoes that actually cause the muscles to atrophy, making the problem even worse. So weak muscles are a big problem. And then I sort of talked about the loading and unloading issues. That's when you load your body weight and unload your body weight. For a variety of reasons, you can have errors when that happens. And then misalignment issues, depending on how all of these bones line up, you can create foot issues. You remember bunions? Bunions, it sort of looks like that. And so that's a misalignment issue. Big toe goes into dorsiflexion. And ankle dorsiflexion and big toe dorsiflexion are probably the two biggest places where you see range of motion issues in the foot. And so the next part in your notes, it just says shoes, the problem or the solution. And they can be both. When you buy shoes, most of the time you buy shoes because they feel comfortable right when you are in the store, or just because they look nice. So there's fashion, and that's an important consideration. If you go to work, you have to often wear shoes that look a certain way, unless you work here, and I don't wear shoes at all. So fashion and function, you buy different shoes for different activities. And depending on what you're doing and how long your feet are in shoes, they can either be the solution or the problem. And so I wrote down some questions to ask when you're buying shoes. So is the shoe wide enough? And then next to that you have the insole test. So if you take the insole out of your shoe and set it on the floor and you step on the insole, if your foot falls over that insole, that means the shoe's too small for you. And there are a couple ways to deal with that. So if you're used to wearing a size 8, you might have to get a size 9 or a size 10 in order for your entire foot to fit in that shoe and have it be wide enough so that you get what's called toe splay. Another condition I asked about in the beginning is Morton's neuroma. Morton's neuroma is between your toes you have nerves, and if you irritate those nerves, they start to form some scar tissue and it can be really painful. And lots of times they deal with Morton's neuroma just by going in and clipping the nerve, and so then that part of your foot will be numb for the rest of your life. And it's caused because you're wearing shoes that are so narrow, they squish your toes, so that when you load, when you step down your foot, instead of your toes being able to splay out to help dissipate that force, they get squished together even tighter and will irritate the nerves that are in between your toes. So, first question to ask yourself about shoes to make sure you have healthy feet is, are they wide enough? And the insole test is probably the best test for that. The next question is it long enough? And lots of times we buy shoes that are also too short. Another foot issue that I see often, hammer toes, where your toes are kind of crinkled up like that. Well, that's from consistently wearing shoes that are too short that actually smash your toes like that. And then after doing that for years and years, your foot just sort of adapts to that so that it doesn't cause pain anymore. So when you first put on a pair of shoes that are too small, it doesn't feel very good. But if you do that consistently, your body just says, oh, we wear shoes that are too small, let's shorten our foot. On there I have a rule of thumb. So ideally when you have a pair of shoes and you're standing, because that's when your foot's going to be its longest and widest, there should be thumbs space between your big toe and the top of your shoe. So there's room to wiggle a little bit in there. Third question is the shoe flat? So ideally your shoe's flat from heel to toe. It's also known as zero drop. And zero drop doesn't say anything about the amount of cushioning on the shoe. So like this shoe is a zero drop shoe. It doesn't have a heel lift or a toe spring. It doesn't lift the toe up and bring the heel up. This is a really thin shoe, but you can have a zero drop shoe. Does anybody in here, just by chance, have a pair of Ultras? Are those Ultras? No.
I have Sporas.
Yeah, Sporas.
Have these. Are those okay?
Yeah, this is a good shoe. So this is a zero drop shoe. Again, a really thin shoe, but there's a brand of shoe called Ultra that is a zero drop shoe, which means the platform that you're standing on is completely flat platform, but they have still a lot of cushion. And so depending on what you're doing, you may want a lot of cushion, or you may not. Ideally the foot's flat. I mentioned that these bones are designed for compression along their long axis. And as soon as you lift your heel, you start to load these bones along their long axis. And so that's going to start causing little points of inflammation wherever you have a joint. So ideally keep your heel to toe as flat as possible. If you're going to continue standing up straight and you lift your heel, you have to move everything back, right? So if this bone, if your tibia and the rest of your body is going to stay vertical and you lift your heel, you have to sort of angle it back, and that's going to change your mechanics all the way up your body. When your foot's flat, you don't have to make any adjustments. So That's that joint coupling, kinetic chain. Happens when you're just standing, so ideally you want to be on a flat platform. Are those all the questions about shoes? Oh yeah, is it flexible in all the right places? You need to have a shoe that's flexible at the toes and the ball of the foot, through the arch, because this is right at the arch, that's where your foot becomes that mobile adapter and a rigid lever. And if you have a bunch of built up arch support in a shoe, it doesn't allow your foot to unlock and load properly. And then so you're kind of always stuck in loading or an unloading place, and so that can cause inflammation. And then at the heel, there's something in lots of shoes called a heel counter. And a heel counter is put in a shoe, you feel it through here, and a heel counter is designed to not let your heel move. So your foot is this really amazing thing that can do all kinds of stuff, and most shoes try to prevent all the stuff that your foot can do. Put a rigid arch in there so that you can't load properly, and put a heel counter in there so that your heel doesn't move, as if the shoe is going to be able to predict the same way your brain can every surface that you're going to be on in the same way that you do, and be able to adapt and respond to these changing environments. This doesn't work out. So this should be something that allows your foot to do what your foot does. So the shoes you wear most of the time when you are loading and unloading, so when you're moving, should have those kinds of qualities. The shoes that you're wearing while you're sitting at your desk aren't going to influence your foot health as much unless they're really narrow shoes. I have some devices here. These are called correct toes. Have you ever seen these? So these are toe spreaders, and since most of us grew up wearing shoes that are too small for our feet, we all have toes that are much narrower than ideal. So we've taken all of these are called rays in your foot. We've taken all these rays and changed their alignment and created sort of shoe-shaped feet. So this is something that you can wear when you're not wearing shoes, or even ideally when you are wearing shoes. And it just slips in between your toes to bring all those rays back into proper alignment. And if you're wearing these and your foot fits in a shoe, the shoe's definitely wide enough.
How long would it take to retrain your toes using a spacer like that?
She asked how long would it take to retrain your toes? A long time. Most people that use something like this to help realign their toes will see immediate improvements in how they move. They'll feel more stable. This is your base of support. This is your interface with the ground. So your foot is a tripod. You have one point here, and one point here. The farther apart these points are, the more stable you are. If you're wearing a shoe that squishes these 2 points really close together, you become a less stable person.
So not pathologic then. Pathologic is
So you want to have wide toes because that's your base of support. And so if you're wearing something like this, you'll immediately notice an improvement in your stability and just your ability to move. But it takes a long time to think about however old you are, shoes for that long that have been compressing your toes, making this space smaller. And that's a lot of years of training to undo. It's wearing shoes for plantar fasciitis, it's potentially good first step to deal with the symptoms, but not with the problem. So, it's like taking a pain reliever because you have a tension headache because you spend 8 hours a day staring at the computer screen rather than sitting up calm, changing your posture a little bit. So you can, destroy your liver by taking NSAIDs all the time, or you could change how you're sitting all day and fix the problem. And so, the reason we do foot strengthening exercises is to actually deal with foot issues, hopefully before they start. The Chinese saying about the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. Second best time is today. It goes for our feet as well. They've been neglected in the fitness industry, especially forever, because when you go to the beach, nobody really cares how strong your feet look. But if you have a six-pack, that's what they care about, But our feet are important. Like I said in the beginning, just quality of life is really important to me, and your feet are going to determine your physical quality of life in large part, because that's how you move around. That gets translated up through your whole body. So wearing stiff shoes that don't allow your foot to go through its whole range of motion, that means that up that kinetic chain, all of your bones aren't going to go through the range of motion that they normally go through, and that means your whole body is going to stiffen up, and it all comes from not letting your feet do what your feet do. So let your feet do what your feet do, and then all these little motions throughout your whole body make you a little looser.